Hi, my name is Kent Kidwell. I'm with Renewing the Renaissance, and we're doing our bust mold. This is a follow-up to the mold that we just did, or excuse me, to the sculpture that we just did of this bust. We'll be walking through the basic construction of a two-part silicone mold. And this is part of our beginner's school program that we're putting on to help people that want to develop their sculptures and produce them. This is a great mold for that purpose, because it'll allow you to cast it in multiple materials, from bronze castings to faux bronze to plaster, or whatever it is you want to produce, or even plastics, to be able to have an original design that you've created and have multiple castings if you choose. So the mold process is essential for that. Otherwise, you're just keeping with you a soft sculpture that could be damaged. So it's really nice to be able to make a mold of something and then cast it yourself, and then have that as a permanent reminder of something that you've sculpted that you really enjoy. And right now we have quite a few materials here on the table, and these are all necessities for producing this mold. And I'm going to walk through them really fast just so you know what they are. We have a hot glue gun, and it's part of the process, so make sure you get one of these. And then glue sticks, have those extra. You're going to need mixing sticks and cups, mixing cups. These are a little bit more expensive, the plastic ones, but they are reusable most of the time. With silicone, you have to mix it really, really well, because if you don't, your cup won't come out clean when the material dries, and then you wind up having to throw the cup out. So if you're going to use plastic cups and you want to get the multiple uses, make sure you mix it super good. Scrape the sides, get on the bottom. So this is important. So you can use the paper cups, however, and they're a little cheaper. So we've got that. You're going to need a scale, and I have this really inexpensive scale. I think it was under $20. You can get it at Walmart, or really there's a lot of places to get these smaller scales. Even the post office has little digital scales that you can use. You need it to be able to measure grams and ounces. If you can do that, then you'll be good. And anything under 3 pounds or up to 3 pounds is what you want to be able to measure. So if it's like, you know, a 1 pound scale, I would definitely go with one that has the ability to measure up to 3 to 5 pounds. So that's important. Scale. I have a knife here, and this is to cut the clay. And the clay that we're using to make this mold with is going to be a wet clay. So a ceramic clay, and you can get this in any ceramic supplier. And it just doesn't really have to be a specific clay. It just needs to be smooth clay that you can use and cut up and make this mold with, because it's really all going to go in the trash at the end of the process anyway, except for the mold itself. So, and then I have the silicone, and right now we're going to be using a smooth-on silicone. This is a tin-based silicone. There's two different kinds of silicones. There's platinum base, which is a little bit more expensive, has slightly better tear strengths. It's a little bit higher grade silicone. But this tin base is a great silicone as well. And it just means when you have platinum and tin base, it means that there's chemical differences in the two different kinds, and they react to different things. So when you're buying silicone, you want to make sure that whatever your material you're sculpting with will blend with the silicone that you're molding. So it's really important, as you this particular kind of clay is a non-sulfur clay. It's really important that you buy a non-sulfur clay when you're molding, when you're planning on molding something, because if it's got sulfur in it, it'll react to the silicone, and then you'll have a gunkiness that won't come off. It ruins the mold completely, and then you have to start from scratch. And a lot of times it'll damage your original as well. So you want to make sure that you're using a non-sulfuric clay to sculpt your original piece, and I think we went through that when we did the sculpture video. And then make sure you can get a tin base silicone. It runs about $10 a pound on average. For this piece, I'm guessing that we're going to use something in the neighborhood of 7 pounds of silicone. And I think this is a 10-pound bucket. So I think we'll be good. We'll have a little bit left over possibly. But, and then I have a mold release agent, which you're going to need as well. And whatever supplier you're going to go for the silicone, it's really important to make sure you get some good mold release, because when you're putting the two halves of silicone, you're pouring them together, they need to be able to pull apart, and the only way they'll do that is with a good mold release agent, and that'll save you a lot of hassle having to cut two silicone pieces apart, because they will bond chemically together, and you won't be able to do that unless you cut them, and that ruins the mold. So good mold release agent, your silicone. This right here is the mixture that goes into the silicone, and usually it's a 10-to-1 ratio, so 10 parts silicone to 1 part curative, or parts AB. So that's what this part is mixed at. So whenever you're mixing on your scale, you just want to make sure if you pour 100 grams of silicone that you add 10 grams of your curative, mix it together. And that's basically how you mix silicone. It gets a little confusing, but for the most part, 10-to-1. It's really what it is. All right, I'm gonna get started on this. What I have is this board that I purchased, which is the foam core board. You can get it at Walmart and a million different places. It's just a construction board that they use for, your kid might use for displays and stuff. It's really good stuff for just making these quick molds. And I'm going to use this as our base, or just a board that we're going to set this piece up on, and we'll get rolling through that. Okay, and something else you'll also need is disposable brushes and an X-Acto blade with a nice fresh blade. It works really well on this foam core, so make sure you get those two things. You're going to need probably 10 or 15 disposable brushes, and you can get them anywhere from 25 cents to 75 cents or even $1 a piece, but some places have good prices on them. And then, like I said, we have the foam core board, and what we're going to do is we're going to take our piece here, we're going to remove it from its armature via this little connection point here, and then we're going to put it in a bed of clay. So to do that, I need to first cut off some of this clay and create a place where we can rest the piece without damaging any of the detail. So I'm just going to quickly lob off a section here, and then I'm going to cut that. You can see I've got about 2 inches cut, and I'm going to cut that into strips. I just do it right here on the block, and I'm just trying to create a nice little soft bed for the piece to sit in, so that it will not damage any of my detail. So right now I've got this. I'm just going to put a little block there, and I'm going to put a block here, and on either side, and then I'll remove the sculpture. Now I'm going to be going, just before I put this on here, I'm going to be molding it in half. Now when you're making a mold, it's really important that you know where your seam line is, and you kind of have to think about it beforehand. A seam line is going to leave a little teeny fine line of matter that slips in between the two cracks or the two pieces of silicone. So whenever you're casting something, you have to be wary of where that seam line is going to be, but you also want it to be able to pull easily from both sides of the piece. We're doing a bust because it's simplistic, it's a rounded shape, so we can figure out our seam line based on that. It's not real complicated. You just have to remember that one side has to pull from the other side has to pull without ripping and damaging the material that you've sculpted in the process, because when you pull a casting, it's going to damage the same thing you're pulling from the mold. So it's difficult to kind of describe this process. It's almost artistic, but all I can say is just make sure that you pick the middle line, and then you try and have it so that you can pull from one side to the other, and also keeping in mind where your seam line is going to be so that you don't leave heavy lines on the more detailed part of your sculpture. For me, I don't want a seam line to run down his nose. I don't want it to run down his chin or in the areas that are most visible. So a seam line would look better on this piece to run along the side of his head, where I can clean them up and no one will know where the seam line was. So right along the ear, down the side of his head. And a lot of times what you can do, if it makes it a little bit easier, you can take an X-Acto and in advance just run a thin line along your piece. Not cutting in deeply, but just a little micro dot, kind of where you understand where your seam line is going to be and where it's going to run. You can even use if you have a hard enough material, you can even use a marker to mark where your seam line is going to be. But make sure you have that in advance, and so you're not doing this last minute when you're already starting this process of lagging it up. So I'm going to take this piece off of its base here. And I don't want to drop it on its face and have to resculpt it before I go through this process. So there it is. And I'm going ahead and set it in there like that. Okay. And I'm seeing some areas that I needed to clean up beforehand. So anyway, I've got the piece on there, and you can see that I've laid it down in a way that the clay is protecting it from any damage to the back of the head. It's soft clay, so I know that it's going to be okay. Now that we have our piece laying in our bed here, we know that it's protected, we know that it's safe. So now I can go ahead and start what they call lagging up the piece, which is again the same process. I just take and I cut off some of this clay. And I think that this one 25-pound bag of wet clay will do this. So I'll try and be a little bit frugal with it just to make sure we can get through it. And again, I'm just cutting off some strips. So 2 inches thick or 1.5 inches thick and about 2 inches wide. And then I'm going to come around the piece. Now that I can get rid of this space and move the stuff out of the way. So I'm going to turn it sideways. So now you can see where it's at. I'm going to come in and I'm going to build this up a little bit around it. Now the idea is that we've chosen the seam line to be right across his ear here. So we need to build this clay up to that point, and then we're going to smooth it out and try and keep it as level as we can. So that's the goal, and we'll see if we can do that with the clay we have here. If you can find things to save clay, like stacking wood blocks, foam blocks, whatever you can find in areas where you'd use a lot more clay, that's a good way to conserve on materials. So I'll go ahead and do that right now. Okay, so we've started the process again of lagging this piece up, and we're just trying to build this up to the point that we've chosen to be our seam line. So I'm going to continue to do that, but I don't want to use all my wet clay to do this because there's a segment here that's quite high and it'll use a lot of clay up. So I found this little plastic container, and I'm going to set it in there as a way of saving materials, and I'll just build over the top of it. So now coming around the outskirts of the lower section of his neck, I'm gonna build it so that it drops down a little bit away from the piece, because we're going to be cutting that away when we cast something, and we just need the seam line can be slightly underneath that, so we're not seeing the seam line on the fascia of the piece. The seam line is underneath it. So just remember, you don't want the seam line kind of is your friend, and at the same time can kind of be your enemy, depending on where you put the seam line, because seam lines really can get in your way and be a pain in the butt. So let me continue to build up the clay wall around this piece. I'm going to be spinning this and stuff as I go, so moving as quickly as I can without cutting my fingers off. A lot of times what people do is they'll put 2x4s around the outskirts. Before they start doing this, it does save a bit of clay, so I just wanted to show you just the basic way what normally gets done, but you can substitute some of this clay for that and then just top it with the wet clay. Also, if you have a wire cutter, those work really good with this as well. I just don't have one on site here, so knife will do. So we'll do a little close-up shot of this once we get to a point to where we're going to start cleaning up our seam line. But for right now, we're just trying to get all the material on there that we can to get as close to that seam line as we can. You want to have about 2 inches outside of the piece. So as you're lagging this up from the point of the sculpture out about 2 inches. That's really important because you're going to need that to make sure the material you're pouring into your mold, it has some resistance and it doesn't just slide through the crack and keep on going and spill out. So it's really important that you have a nice 2-inch gap on either side or on the sides of your piece. So it'll all make sense as we roll through this. Right now it's a process, but it really is a process that has an end result that'll make more sense to you once you see it later in the process. So let me continue to Okay, we just finished lagging up the piece where we have all the clay that we need to be able to make the seam line is now on the piece here. I'm actually going to cut away a little bit of this material at the bottom because I don't want to have to use all that rubber at this lower section. That's not going to make a bit of difference anyway. Since this right here is going to be open, the neck cavity will be open in the mold. It's better that we go ahead and just take some of this material off because we really don't need it. So I'm going to take off about 1 inch of material right here. That way it'll save that much silicone rubber in the end process. So let's get rid of that. Okay. So out that goes. A little bit of savings of clay too, so that's always good. Okay. All right, so again, we've got the basic structure of our lagged up piece here, and just finishing up that part so that we can move into cleaning up our seam line and then wiping it down, rinsing it down with water with a nice soft brush to really crisp up that seam line. You want it to be really tight. The idea is that the clay will bump up right up against the sculpture and that there'll be no little bits of clay on here. It'll be nice and a nice seam where it bumps up against your sculpture. You just want that to be really clean. So I have a little metal tool here I'm going to use for that. But really anything with a kind of a rounded edge that might have a little sharp edge to it. I use this in the sculpting, you might remember, but it also is good with this as well. So if you have a tool you were using for sculpting, it'll probably transfer right over to this process as well, just as easily. So I'm going to come around and I'm going to just kind of gently go in. I don't want to cut the piece and I don't want to do any damage to my sculpture. I'm just trying to gently push into the clay and then pull away the excess like this, gently. And what's left behind is a kind of messy line, but at least the material is no longer goofing up my line here. So I'm going to try and smooth that out. And as you can see here, the line is really choppy. It bumps up against the piece, but there's gaps and it's unclean. I don't want that in there. I want this to be a nice tight seam line. So I'm going to take my tool here and I'm going to kind of scrape away the excess clay and pushing and scraping until I have a cleaner seam line. But at the same time, you really want to be careful not to bump your sculpture because you're going to see that little mark in your finished piece. So, and it saves you that much cleanup in the end, just to make sure that you're being gentle and pulling away the clay without harming the piece itself. So I'm going to go ahead and go around the entire piece like this, and then I'll show you what to do once we have that done in just a second. Okay, now we've gone ahead and we've got the full structure done. The line has been cleaned up roughly, but it hasn't been wiped down yet with our brush. You can see I've trimmed a little bit of the extra clay on here and brought it down to that 2 inches. And then I've trimmed it back to 1 inch around the base area where we're going to have the opening into the mold. So I'm going to go ahead and take the brush here, and the idea is to burn away any material on that seam line. And you can see here that it's much cleaner now. And you can see where the clay bumps right up against the piece. And we've got it nice and clean. Oops. So that's done. And then when you're done with that, you can take your sponge and just come in and try and pull away any of this excess residue that's on the clay and smooth it out. So going around the entire piece in this fashion, by the time you're finished, you'll have a nice crisp seam line and smooth clay. One of the things you need to watch not to do as you're making these molds is having the seam line come up at an angle. So in other words, we want to have that level clay as it runs along the course of your seam line. It can rotate, it can go up and down like this, like a wave, but you don't want it to tilt. So you want it to be level and go and follow the seam line in a level fashion. So now that we have the piece all cleaned, the seam line is nice and tight. I can see that there's no bits of crumbled clay or anything. The seam is really clean line. I want to let the clay dry a minute, let that wet clay, or excuse me, the wet clay on here get less tacky to the touch. And once it's at that point, I'm going to give you a little pointer. It's a good idea to hit it with clear urethane fast drying spray. The reason we do that is it kind of seals the wet clay and it creates a smoother texture so that we can add our keys, and that's an important step. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and spray the wet clay on here so that you can see that that's all sealed up. I'm not focusing so much of the spray on the sculpture, just mostly on the clay, and that should do that. So had a chance to shake this up a little bit. Hopefully it's good. And doesn't take much, just enough to seal that clay up a little bit. Okay. Pew. Does reek. You want to make sure you're in a well-ventilated area when you use this stuff because it can, it's not good to breathe in. Okay, we're just finishing up our seam line here. We've got the clay all lagged up. We've got our seam line cleaned up really well. And I've gone ahead and sprayed it down with some crystal clear enamel. This was flat, but you can use whatever. If you have gloss, it also works. And now what we're going to do is go through and add key locks. Now these key locks are designed for when the two sides of the mold come together, that there's something that will hold the mold in position so that your seam line doesn't go out of whack. So really what this is just making sure that the two sides come together and join perfectly and mate perfectly together so that they don't move around. And for this, I'm just using what I have in the shop, which is typically how these are made by a lot of people. And I found this little tip to this little bottle, and it's cone shaped. And I'm going to use that to make my keys. The reason I want it cone shaped because I don't want the rubber to go into the other side and then not pull apart. So I want it to be cone shaped so that they'll set, lock, and allow me to remove both sides smoothly and they'll come apart. So I'm just going to take this cone shaped piece and I'm just going to push it in just like this. And what will happen is the silicone rubber that we put over the top of this will fall inside these little keys, and then when we make a full layer here, we're going to put plaster over the top, and then we're going to flip it over and remove all this clay, and what we'll have left is the negative, or the positive of this, which is little cone-shaped nipple things sticking out of the silicone. And so I'm just going to add these kind of liberally on here just to make sure that we're getting lots of keys and lots of registration points on here. It's not, you don't have to be super anal about it, just need to get them in there. Okay, I've been putting in the registration marks or the key points on this thing. I've just gone around liberally adding these little cone-shaped divots inside of the clay here, which will work as little pockets for silicone. When we pour our layer of silicone over this, they're going to go inside of each one of these little pockets. And the good thing about that is that we'll have really nice little keys to make sure that the two sides of rubber come together and then they're registered together so that our seam line stays exactly where it should stay. And that's the point of keys. So I'm going to finish putting those in real fast, and then we're going to work on putting a little wall barrier around this sculpture and this mold so that we can keep the silicone rubber from flowing over into areas where it doesn't need to be. It saves on silicone that way, and it's just a good way of doing it. Some people just let it flow over, but they don't care about how much they waste, whereas it really is kind of expensive stuff, so it's better to block it in so you don't have to lose that money. Okay, on this next section, what we're going to do is add a wall to block in this piece so that when we pour silicone rubber over the top, that the silicone won't pour over the side. It's real important that we do that because it gets to be a real pain when you're just dumping good silicone down along the sides and have to keep pulling it back up. So to do that, I've prepared a couple things. One is a hot glue gun, and I have foam core board. Now I don't want this to be a complicated thing, it needs to be fast. So what I'm going to do, I need to make this wall about this tall, which is about 6 or so inches tall from the bottom of this piece all the way up to about here. So about 6 inches, and I think that will cover it all the way around. So I'm going to cut a strip off of this. I want this flat edge, so I'm going to cut about a 6-inch wall piece, which is right about there. All right, I got my hot glue gun, and what I'm going to do, so you can see it clearly from your side, is starting in the middle. I put the piece on there and just take my knife, put it at the bottom, and score it straight up. You just want to score one side of the foam and break it, just like that. So I know that I've got a large curved segment here to do. So I'm going to take where I've made that cut, and I'm going to add a bunch of them, a bunch of scored marks on the back of this, just like that. Because I want it to bend naturally all the way around the piece. So it takes a second, but it really goes quickly once you get rolling. Okay, so now I've got these scored, and you notice it naturally just wants to start bending in a circle. That one doesn't, but there we go. So those cracks are turning into being our wall here. I want to make sure we're using our flat edge so it sets right up against the ground really well, just like that. So I could use a little bit more of a split here, there, maybe one or two more here. It's just a fast way of building it around the piece, because a lot of times you'll see guys making molds and they just take forever to build these walls around them. And then because of my impatience, I developed this way of doing it. Now because I have a negative bend coming outward like this, I'm doing the exact same thing only on the other side. So set it on there and then mark where you're going to start bending it, and then just start slicing on the inside exact same way so that you can get that negative turn. And then I'll break out the hot glue gun and you'll see how that works in a second when we come to locking this thing down. So, the cuts here aren't, there we go. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and lock that down by just taking a little bit of the hot glue and just holding it in place and just putting it right around the base, just like that. Hold it for a second and it should be good to go. And bring it all the way over. I've used up my glue stick. Okay. Now I just want to do the same thing on this side, and again just running the cuts up on this side of the piece. Okay, that's sturdy now. I just need to finish this by wrapping it around this corner. go. I'm going to remove this plastic piece at the bottom here. It doesn't really need to be there because it's had a few minutes to get more solid, and then I'm going to put this wall up anyway, which will keep it pressed right up against there. So now that's not going to be in my way when I add the next portion of it. So I'm going to cut another little section of this material, and that should be enough to finish it. And since we have a few gaps here, and I just squish those out, fill those gaps in just a little teeny bit. You want to make it as tight against the wall on the inside as you can, because you don't want silicone to run down inside that spot. It's just a waste of silicone. So I'm just pushing that against it to make sure we get a nice seam. And I can come back and clean up those keys if they're going to vanish on me. So that's not hard to do. Just keep them smushed down a little bit. Okay, to give ourselves a little bit more space or a little bit more access point with our brushes, I'm going to cut down this extra wall on here a little bit. We don't need quite that much. So I'm going to cut it down to about 1.5 inches all the way around it. This will just give us better access with our brushes. You kind of see what I'm talking about here. It's really good to have a nice sharp X-Acto when you're doing this stuff, otherwise it'll drive you insane. Okay, so I just did that so I could get in there with the brushes along the side when I'm putting the silicone rubber on there. So I'm about ready to pour the silicone in this. So I've got a cup, I've got my scale, and I'm going to zero it out after I put the cup on it. So you start it and it goes to 0, which means that there's no weight on the scale itself. Then when you put your cup on there, it's on this scale it's 36 grams. So my cup is 36 grams and I don't want that to weigh into my material equation. I want to make sure that I'm pouring the right amount of material in there and I'm not counting the cup as part of that equation. So I need to what they call tare or zero it out. So I hit that. And it's supposed to zero it out. Okay. All right, so now I've got that. And so now it's just as if the cup wasn't even here. So now all the material I pour into this will be measured, and I know that I'm going to get a good mix